I've recently explained why you should use Linux. I've taught you how to theme Linux, and I've also shown you the insanely cool things you can indeed accomplish with Linux. But if you're an absolute beginner thinking about going into Linux or just swapped to a Linux-based operating system, jumping straight into the advanced things might be a bit daunting. And whilst there are lots of guides and wikis, there's nothing that is done the certified dinky way. So today, I am going to be your guide into Linux. This video has chapters, and it is indeed sectioned in a way so you can view specific parts, because there might be certain chapters going over things you already know. But for the vibes, I recommend just watching the entire thing anyways. If you want a slightly more advanced guide that centers around actually theming Linux and doing things such as config files and whatnot, I recommend this other guide that I've made. This can be seen as an introduction to Linux. So with the intro done, let us commence. I want to quickly go over some basic terminology about computers. Since this guide is meant for everyone, not everyone might be familiar with this kind of terminology. What I'm going to go through is irrespective of any operating system, whether it's Windows or Linux or Mac OS. In your computer, you obviously have storage. These can be a SSD or a HDD, a storage device, a drive. These drives are formatted into partitions, and each partition uses a file system. If you think of an entire storage device as a box, a partition is a separated part of that box, and the file system would be a specific method in which you would store items in that partition, in that box. A drive can have 1, 2, 3, or more partitions, and each one can have its own unique file system. Knowing this is good because Windows uses a file system that is proprietary. It's called NTFS. It isn't very good, and on Linux you would prefer others such as ext4 or BTFRS. You can still read and write to partitions that are NTFS on Linux, but you wouldn't actually install Linux to an NTFS partition. You can't do that. USB drive partitions are usually in the FAT32 file system. If these things seem confusing to you, don't worry. You don't really need to know these things. It's just good to have a vague idea of them. Because when you install an operating system, you would install it to a drive and a specific partition. It's good to know these things so you don't accidentally delete a partition that contains important data. I personally recommend, however, to have 2 separate storage devices, physical ones. In other words, for instance, an SSD for Windows, where you have Windows things, and an SSD for Linux, where you have Linux things. This reduces the risk of losing files by accidentally deleting a partition, and it's also more stable because Windows tends to kind of ruin things when you have 2 operating systems on the same drive and 2 different partitions. Windows isn't very friendly to dual booting as much as Linux is. And that is it for this part. Even if you use Windows, it is good to know about partitions and this kind of storage methodology, because like I mentioned, this isn't a Linux specific thing. It's just basic computer terminology and facts. Did you know that Linux is actually a kernel, the core of an operating system? It's not a fully fledged OS by its own. For that, you would use things called distributions or a distro. These are usually made by a third party, and these distributions or distros are what you would use as a regular operating system, such as Windows or Mac OS. There are friendly and easy-to-use distros where the target audience is everyone. These can be Pop! OS, Zorin, Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Bazzite, so on and so on. There's lots of user-friendly distros. There's also what I like to call intermediate Linux distros. They don't come with as many guardrails, and the odds of you accidentally messing something up might be a bit higher. Examples of intermediate distros can be Endeavour OS or Garuda. And then there's what I like to call hardcore Linux distros. These are usually just for programmers or very nerdy people. They're meant for experienced computer users, and examples of these hardcore Linux distros can be Arch Linux, Nix OS, Artix, GUIX, so on and so on. You can customize all of these distros. None of them will hold you back. The main differentiating factor between them is the starting point they provide and the built-in tools that are meant for ease of use that ship with the actual distro. Furthermore, things such as support might differ. Arch Linux, you would have to set up and install from scratch, whilst Zorin, for instance, would be an entire operating system provided to you. Furthermore, Linux distros might be based upon another Linux distro, in essence using that as a core. Zorin, for instance, is actually based on Ubuntu, and Ubuntu is actually based on Debian. We would say that Zorin is an Ubuntu-based Linux distro. This is good, because if you learn how to use Zorin perfectly, it'll be very, very similar to other Ubuntu-based Linux distros, whether it's actually just Ubuntu, Debian, or Mint OS, for instance. For this guide, we're going to be focusing on the user-friendly set of distributions. However, nearly everything I will explain applies to all Linux distros. So after learning these things, you'll be able to swap to pretty much anything with only some minute differences. So moment of truth for this guide, what distro have I chosen to use as an example? Today, I'm going to use ZorinOS, an Ubuntu-based, extremely easy to use and user-friendly Linux distribution. It is absolutely perfect if you're coming from macOS or Windows. You will almost immediately feel at home because the user interface is familiar, and even if you don't know anything about Linux, you will likely know how to use this operating system by default. Here's a brief overview of how to install a Linux distro. You go to the installation page of said distro and you install an ISO file. You're going to flash this ISO file onto a USB stick and then boot from the USB stick. You can change the boot order of which drive is prioritized in the BIOS of your computer. How you enter the BIOS and the UI differs. However, you can usually enter the BIOS by spamming delete key or F2 whilst restarting your computer. After doing that, you will boot from the USB stick and you're actually going to run the operating system directly from the USB. It's not just an installer, you can actually just test the OS directly from the USB stick, although it might run a bit slower. It is here where you will also be installing the OS. To flash an ISO to a USB drive, you can use tools such as Balena Etcher. It's fine. So with that brief overview done, let's actually go over how you do this with ZorinOS. You go to the Zorin website, it is extremely user-friendly and you'll immediately know how to install it. They have Zorin Pro, which has some added support and is usually something you would use if you want to support the devs, which feel free to do that. It's a one-time purchase and it also comes with some perks. You can read about them. Usually I recommend going with the base version of Zorin. It's fine. After you have the ISO, you would use a USB stick and plug it into your computer. Format it to the FAT32 file system. Open Balena Etcher, select the USB drive, select the ISO, and press Flash. After it's done, you will have a bootable device medium of ZorinOS. Restart your computer and enter the BIOS. Change the boot order to prioritize the USB stick. And after that, you'll be running from a live image of ZorinOS. As I've explained in the overview, here you can see the icon to install the operating system. You can set everything up from the installer quite easily. Language, keyboard settings, region. You can select the partition to install it to, create an entirely new partition. Zorin usually provides defaults for partitioning that work well, even for dual booting. It will detect the OSs you may have installed, but if you have many drives and disks, you may want to manually partition, which I will demonstrate. You will see the identifier of each drive in this UI, as well as the partitions and free space that may exist. First, you find whichever drive you want to use, then you create an ext4 or btrfs partition. I prefer ext4. You can also delete an existing partition and then use that new empty space and create a new partition. Just make sure not to delete a partition that has important data. In this UI, I will set the file system to ext4 and then set the root directory to just the slash, which means root. This is the partition we will install the system to. And then we will also have to set the device for the bootloader installation. And this will be the device where the root partition is. Do not select an actual partition, just the device of the partition. And press install. It shows you with a check mark which partitions will be formatted in this operation. This is how you manually partition using this UI, which the Zorin installer provides. You'll also create a user account with a name and you will name your computer, or the host. you will set a password as well. This is important, do not forget the password, of course. After you've installed it, you're essentially done. You can restart and from the BIOS select the boot order to make sure the priority is highest with whatever drive you've installed Linux to. Usually, the boot menu with Linux will let you choose whether you want to open Windows or Linux. This installation process is essentially identical to all easy-to-use to intermediate Linux distros. Things such as Arch might be more complicated. If you've got any questions or any troubles, feel free to search them up online or ask in our servers. There are plenty of people that are willing to assist, and more often than not, happy to assist. With that out of the way, it is time to go over some basics, because now we've installed the operating system successfully. Back in my day, there was an operating system called Unix. It is very old, and fun fact, Linux is Unix-like. macOS is also Unix-like. In fact, it is based on an older version of Unix. You don't need to know what that means. However, it's good to know because this means that macOS and Linux are technically more similar to each other than Linux would be similar to Windows, for instance. As a result of this similarity between macOS and Linux, there's a similarity when it comes to things such as file systems and storage, which is to say that it works slightly more different than it does on Windows. Physical storage devices, whether it's an SSD or a USB stick, when you install them, unlike Windows, it won't be automatically assigned a drive letter and you can open it. No. On Linux, you would have to mount it in order to gain access to it and read and write to it. Doing this is very, very simple on Zorin. You just open the File Explorer and you do it. The file system will almost always look like this on all Linux distros, with a home directory containing all of your users, usually it's just one user, and a bunch of system files where more advanced things are happening. Usually you would only be concerned with the home directory and respectively your user directory, which conveniently also brings us to the next segment. In Windows, you would log into your Microsoft account and potentially run certain applications with administrator privileges. Linux doesn't work this way. Whilst installing, you created a user account and a password. You also named your computer, which I will call the host. Instead of running applications through administrator mode, you would use something called super user or sudo. Likewise, files and directories might be locked and you can't edit them unless you use sudo mode. Super user mode. The user you create will be able to run things in sudo when you provide the password that you've chosen for it. Linux also has a bespoke permission system. Some files might require sudo to enter, others might require you to be a specific user or sudo to enter. And executable applications also need to have the permission of being executable, something you would give the application. You can kind of think of sudo as administrator mode, however, it is a lot more powerful and you would never use sudo as often you would use administrator mode on Windows. In your home directory, you might have a folder with the same name as your user account. If you create multiple user accounts, you'll have multiple folders here. And each folder will only be able to be accessed and edited by the specific user or super user mode, which not all user accounts you create need to have super user mode available. You can ensure only specific accounts have sudo. But for most people, your main account will of course have sudo. I implore you to look around in the OS. Try doing different things. You will quickly learn that on the surface, Zorin is not much different at all from Windows or Mac OS. Furthermore, there are graphical user interfaces that let you install applications such as Discord or Steam. You would use this to also uninstall apps and update them. The reason why you wouldn't just go to a website and install stuff is because software is handled differently on Linux, but I will get into that later. On Steam, you can install any game and run it, even if it doesn't have a native Linux build, thanks to Proton and Wine, provided to you by the grace of the Linux community and Valve HQ. And that's essentially it. You're now using Linux. It isn't difficult. You can slowly migrate your workflow from Windows to Linux. Try alternative applications such as LibreOffice instead of Microsoft Office, Bitwig Studio or Reaper instead of FL Studio or Ableton Live. You can customize the OS. try to learn more about the OS by doing random things. And if you're someone who only uses the computer to browse the web and do basic things, you don't need to continue this guide. You've learned enough. You have Linux, and everything on the surface is something that you'll be able to use on a daily basis. You can slowly learn more and more things by doing, and eventually with time become an intermediate user. Regardless, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and I would like to teach some deeper knowledge about Linux. If you feel that you're not entirely ready yet, you can just stop here, pause, and experiment more with your operating system until the time comes where you feel more comfortable. Before we move on to the next part, I have an important message. Most people sit down when they use computers. Whether it's learning Linux or working or playing games, you usually sit down. Not good. It's bad for your posture, makes you more lethargic, leading to reduced productivity as well as fatigue. It also increases the risk of blood clots. Not good. Which is why I would like to tell you about the E7 and E7 Pro standing desks with adjustable height by FlexiSpot. The FlexiSpot E7 Pro is probably the sleekest, most stable, and firm desk I've ever tried, period. You can adjust the height to multiple levels using a motor that is extremely quiet and very, very stable. And you can also set different heights as presets to quickly switch between them. The desk, as I will demonstrate, is very, very sturdy, with a lift capacity of 180 kilograms or a static load capacity of 200 kilograms. More than enough for a whole setup by a wide margin. I've decided to use this desk while writing, editing, and producing this video. And after going through that experience, I can attest that it is a much better experience than sitting down by a lot. It is a healthier way to work, and it is superior to a normal desk, essentially in every way, even if you use it at a normal desk height, because it is so sturdy and stable. Furthermore, there is also a wide amount of options they provide you when it comes to design, such as color or tabletop or size. You'll be able to mix and match until you find an option that fits your needs. And there are also two variants. You don't need to use the Pro version. It's an incredible value for the price, really, and I feel kind of stupid that I haven't obtained such a desk earlier. It includes a 15-year warranty with a 30-day risk-free return guarantee. You can visit FlexiSpot's website to find out more. I've of course included links, and you can use my code DINKY for an extra $30 discount on the desk of your choice. And get your own E7 Pro standing desk, which I can highly recommend. Many thanks to FlexiSpot for choosing to sponsor this project. I will be using their products as part of my studio permanently now because, as you can see, I can highly recommend them. Now that we can learn more things and practice Linux in a more healthy manner, it is time to move on, mainly to the subject of the terminal. The terminal is a subject that imposes fear upon many. A lot of people imagine using Linux as an extremely terminal-based activity, and that's not necessarily true. The terminal isn't scary. It is simply a way to interact with your computer using a text-based interface instead of a graphical user interface. That is it. Windows has a terminal. macOS also has a terminal. And on Linux, it is good to learn the basics of how to use a terminal, not only because it lets you do certain things way quicker than using the graphical user interface, but learning how to use the terminal might help you solve certain problems, and it isn't difficult. That is a misconception, and I'm going to prove that it's very, very simple, actually. And this is what you will see when you open up the terminal on Zorin. You can imagine this as an equivalent to opening up the file explorer in your home directory. This comparison is in fact so identical that I will have them side by side. Unlike the file explorer, you don't see any files or directories in the terminal immediately. It's just empty. To list files and folders, use the ls command, short for list. Now you can see the files and folders in the directory we are currently in. In the File Explorer, you can enable this option to show hidden files and folders, which are files that are prefixed with a dot in the name. In the terminal, you write ls-a in order to show all files, including hidden files. This -a part of the command is called an argument. You use arguments to customize the behavior of commands or pass in additional information. To enter a folder in the File Explorer, you would simply double-click it. To do the equivalent in the terminal, we would use the cd command, followed by the name of the folder, like this. cd for change directory. To go back a directory, you can use the arrows on the file explorer. On the terminal, you would write cd ... to go back one directory. In the file explorer, I can go to a directory, create a new folder, and give it a name. In the terminal, we use cd to go to a directory, and use the mkdir command to create a new directory, like so. Note that I always use underscores instead of spaces when naming folders and files. This is because if the directory ever has a space in its name, you would need to wrap the entire directory name in quotes. Otherwise, the terminal will read every space as the start of a new command. I recommend when creating file names or folders to always use underscores or dashes instead of spaces. mkdir is short for make directory. Quite self-explanatory. In the file explorer, we can create a simple text file and edit it with the built-in text editor Zorin has. In the terminal, we can use the touch command to create a text file and then edit it with the nano command. Nano is the built-in terminal text editor Zorin ships with, but there are various third-party terminal text editors you can use, including Neovim, but those you have to download. With Nano, you use Ctrl+S to save and Ctrl+X to exit. We can also use the cat command to print out the contents of the file directly to the terminal. To delete a file, you would use the rm command. Like so, we can delete the file from the terminal by using the rm command. rm for remove. To delete an entire directory, we would add the -r argument to the rm command. This is a must for directories. -r is short for recursive. Now, some files or folders might be locked. You might require higher permission to access them or create things in that directory. In other words, you would need to use the sudo command to give yourself higher permission when doing it. If I go to the /var directory, which is a system directory, if you remember from the previous chapters where I go over the file system tree, /var is indeed outside our user directory. This means we don't have permission to create a file or a new directory in /var, but we can use sudo to give ourselves elevated permissions. To use sudo, simply add it as a prefix to any command that you want to use in the terminal, like so. It will prompt you with entering a password, and then we can create the file. With sudo, we can also edit it with nano, or delete the file. This is how you use sudo to edit files that require having elevated permission. Important disclaimer: never copy-paste commands from the internet that use sudo until you're absolutely certain that they are harmless. Sudo is more powerful than administrator mode in Windows, and it will let you delete crucial system files, which will completely destroy your computer, which can be a pain to fix. And if you run an application with sudo or a script, it will be able to do anything with the super user permissions. Not good. Make sure that the application is safe. And if you're uncertain, search it up online or ask someone knowledgeable. Linux gives you more freedom, it gives you more control, but you need to be more responsible. Sudo usage is an example of this. And these are the basics of how to use the terminal. You now know how to create folders and files. You know how to go to a directory or go back. You know how to list what stuff is in a directory. And you know about the sudo command and how to do things with the super user permission. Practice these. I also have made a cheat sheet so it becomes easy to memorize these things. As you use the terminal, you will quickly memorize how to move around the file system. And in the future, when there's time to use more commands, you'll be ready for it. Whenever you want to create a file or a folder, I recommend using the terminal to practice. Now, these are the very basics of the terminal. So let us move on to a subject where we can also use the terminal, but user-friendly operating systems usually provide a graphical user interface for this terminal command. There are many software programs that do indeed have native builds for Linux. today more than ever, and in the future, hopefully even more. But something that might cause a bit of confusion with Linux is how you actually install software. On Windows, every software has its own website, and you would install it from there, completely separate. You don't know if a website is actually malicious or not, and there is no central way to install stuff. Linux is different, and there's a few different ways to install packages and softwares on Linux, but the core way you would do it is by using the package manager that ships with the Linux distribution. Each Linux distro that is based on a different core version of Linux will use a different package manager. The entire philosophy of package managers is something that Windows by default lacks. When you open the graphical user interface for installing applications on Zorin, behind the scenes it uses the package manager. It is why you'll find many different packages and software freely available for you to download. So what package manager does Zorin use, and how can we use it in the terminal instead of the graphical user interface? Ubuntu-based Linux distributions all use the package manager apt, or apt, short for Advanced Package Tool. Zorin is based on Ubuntu, which is based on Debian, so it uses apt. So if you learn how to use the apt command in the terminal, you will learn how to install packages on Ubuntu, Zorin, MintOS, Debian, and other Debian-based operating systems. So for instance, on Zorin, if you want to install Steam, you can use the graphical user interface, or you can use the command for the package manager, which looks like this. It's very simple. apt install Steam, that's it. Note that you will have to use sudo for this. It's the same reason why the graphical user interface for the package manager asked you to input the password. To install stuff to your system, you need sudo. Each terminal application or command does have a built-in manual. You can use the man command and then the name of the actual command to view the manual. I recommend doing this for apt because I'm not going to go into details on how it works. So in the future, I recommend using the terminal to install packages and software, and not the graphical user interface, to become more accustomed to using the terminal. Furthermore, you can run apt update to get the latest versions of all the software you have installed, and then write apt upgrade to upgrade every single software to said version. Immediately you will notice that you have the latest version of the software. Experiment with the package manager, and eventually you will add the apt command to your repertoire of commands you know in your Linux distro. You can now navigate the file system with commands, and you can install and delete stuff. Very good. Each distro can have its own unique package manager. However, knowing how to use one package manager will almost essentially teach you how to use the other ones as well, since the differences are trivial to get used to. Compare that to Windows. You find different websites for software. You lose track of what you have installed, and you can't easily uninstall things because they're not all installed through the same package manager. You need to manually update things. Your operating system slowly becomes bloated and slow. Not good. The Linux methodology of package managers, in my opinion, is better. Furthermore, it's also safer because packages are usually verified by the maintainers of the repository of packages, which differs depending on the distro you're on. There are things called app images, however, which let you actually install Linux applications from the web as well, akin to how it's done on Windows. I don't usually recommend this. The only reason you would do this is if your software doesn't exist in the package manager. You can install the app image and just run it as a regular executable file. This has been the overview of package managers, and now you know a few more things about your operating system. What I've taught you up until now really are the basics of the Zorin operating system, and the knowledge can be transferred to other operating systems that are in the user-friendly category. And all of the things I've taught you, especially navigating the terminal, will also apply to more advanced Linux distributions. This knowledge is transferable, so if you choose to test another Linux distributions, don't worry, everything you've learned will be the same, with the exception of sometimes having to learn the commands for a different package manager. Using Linux isn't difficult, and aside from the terminal stuff, I'm sure you have already learned on your own how to do the most basic things that I've taught you how to do. And slowly, as you learn more and more things and become more used to Linux, you might feel the need to try to do some more extravagant things. such as learning how to customize your Linux distribution in more detail, maybe some theming, basic script editing and stuff like that. Or God forbid, if you truly want to jump into the rabbit hole, tiling window managers and ditch the desktop environments that your operating system comes with. You can learn things on your own until you become more confident. I don't make many guides, this is true, but I do think a guide to anything, such as Linux, would be a lot easier to watch and understand if it was made tastefully with a bit of style, instead of some long slog of a tutorial. Briefly teach you how to do certain things, how certain things work, and let you slowly get accustomed to it. I wanted to do this since I create a lot of cool things with Linux and a lot of people want to swap over but don't really know how to start. I've made a more advanced guide, but to end this kind of trilogy, I want to make the absolute most user-friendly guide to Linux. Even if you're someone who's not very computer savvy, I hope the information I managed to convey has been simple to understand, which is why I've included a lot of animations and a lot of stuff like that to visually help you understand. I've tried to make this a very beginner-friendly guide to Linux, so if you have someone, a friend or someone that you would like to introduce to Linux, do share this entire video. I think it might help them. There's also a lot of people that are more computer savvy or nerdy, but still use Windows, and I hope that this has been a good introduction for those people as well. I hope that this has made it less daunting for you to swap over to Linux. And eventually, if you want to learn how to theme it or do slightly more advanced things, do watch my other guide. If you're still not sure whether you want to swap over or not, do watch that project as well. I think I can convince you to swap,